Hi everyone, welcome back to the Florida Fishing Academy's virtual classroom. Today we are going to be testing objects to see if they sink or float. Sometimes we sort objects by different characteristics, maybe their color, size, or shape. Today we are going to be testing different objects that I have here, and we're going to see if they will sink or float. If an object sinks, it will go down to the bottom of the water, and if an object floats, it will sit on top or right below the top of the water here. Let's see what we get. All right, so now we're going to perform our experiment. I've already prepared a tank of water here for us to test our objects in, and I've collected a few things from my home. I've got a lemon, I've got a highlighter, a spoon, and an egg. I want you first to predict which items you might think will sink and which ones you think might float. First, let's start with the egg. Do you think the egg will sink or float in my freshwater tank I have here? Make your prediction. Now let's see if your prediction was right. I'm going to put the egg in here and let's see what it will do. So we can see that the egg went down to the bottom of the water. So in my freshwater tank here, my egg sinks. My next item is my highlighter. Make your prediction. Do you think my highlighter will sink like my egg, or do you think it might float? Make your prediction. Now let's see if your prediction is right. 1, 2, 3. All right, so my highlighter floats. Let's test another object. My next object is my metal spoon. Do you think my metal spoon will sink like my egg, or do you think it will float like my highlighter? Make your prediction. Now let's test your guess. So my spoon sank just like my egg. And my last item that we're going to test is my lemon. Do you think my lemon will sink like my spoon and egg, or do you think it might float like my highlighter? Make a prediction. Now let's test that prediction. 1, 2, 3. All right, so my lemon and highlighter both float, and my spoon and my egg both sink. So we can sort those objects by their characteristics. My highlighter and my lemon float, while my spoon and my egg sink. See if you can try that at home. Use different objects. You might not have a highlighter, egg, or lemon or spoon, but try different items and see whether they sink or float, and you can sort them by those characteristics. Hi everyone! So now that we've tested different items and how they sink and float, we're going to test these items in different types of water. We're going to be testing the density of these items. Density is the degree of compactness of an object or substance, and how much space an object or substance takes up in relation to the amount of matter or particles that the object has, or its mass. Heavy and compact objects will have high densities, while light objects that do not take up lots of space will have low densities. In salt water, the density of water increases. All liquids have different densities. Let's see how this works now that we test our egg in fresh water and in our salt water. I've already mixed this salt water up, and we're going to test whether we think the egg will continue to sink in salt water, or if we think it will do something different than what we saw in our first experiment. To remind us of what we saw in our first experiment, I'm going to take my egg and put it in my fresh water. It sinks, just like we saw in our first experiment. Now I have my jar of salt water. Let's see if this egg will sink or float in salt water. Remember what I said is that salt water has a higher density than fresh water. Do you think this egg will sink, or do you think it might float in salt water? Let's test it. So, we can see that in my salt water, my egg floats. Well, in my fresh water, my egg sinks. This is because the density of salt water is higher, allowing my egg to then float. Now that we have tested how an egg will float in salt water and sink in fresh water, we can tell that the same amount of one liquid will not have the same density. We know that in salt water, the density of water increases. All liquids have different densities. Here I have different types of liquids. I have my vegetable oil and I have my water colored with food coloring. These are both light density liquids, but they are different from each other. Let's see which item will float to the top. Make a prediction. Do you think the vegetable oil will be more dense and sink to the bottom? Or do you think that the water will be more dense and sink to the bottom? Make your prediction. Now let's test it. First, I'm going to put my water in my cup. Now I'm going to take my vegetable oil and put it in my cup. Watch to see how these liquids separate. We can see that there is a clear barrier between my water on the bottom and my vegetable oil on the top.